On July 31st, USCIS announced that it was going to be increasing the naturalization immigration fees, which are currently set at about $725 and going up by almost double. Hi, my name is Mohammed Salim. I've been practicing immigration law since 2010. In this video, I want to explain to you how you can file your citizenship application before the fees go up, which are set to begin October 2nd. So if you file your citizenship application before October 2nd, 2020 of this year, you've got about a couple of months to get everything together. In this video, I'm going to explain all the documents that you need and the general eligibility requirements for that. So to begin, let's focus on what are the requirements to file a citizenship application. Well, obviously the most important thing that you want to focus on is that you have been a green card holder. And there's two bases for applying for citizenship. The first basis is that you've been a green card holder for about 5 years. You are able to file a little bit earlier than that 5-year period, but generally speaking, you're going to be about 5 years of a green card holder. And then the other basis is the marriage to a US citizen, which allows you to apply earlier than that 5-year period, which is a 3-year period. I'm going to talk about both of those requirements and how you should determine whether you're in the 5-year period or you're in the 3-year period. Just because you're married to a US citizen doesn't automatically, or we're married to a US citizen, doesn't automatically make you fit into that 3-year category. There's a little bit of other things you want to consider before making that determination. But first and most importantly, this is something that everybody who's applying for citizenship has to understand and be aware of. What are the general eligibility requirements? So number one, you have to be above 18. I know there's some people that were underage and green card holders. Maybe their parents had green cards and they had them at the younger age. They can't apply for citizenship until they become over the age of 18. Number two, very important, you are a permanent resident of the United States for a period of time, whether it's 5 years or 3 years. We'll talk about the differences of which category you want to apply in a little bit as well, but just make sure you meet that required period of time. Number three, you've lived within that district that you're applying for at least 3 months before you file your application. So if you move from New Jersey to California, you want to make sure that you've been there for at least 3 months before you apply for your citizenship in that area. Otherwise, it's unclear whether you're locally there for that temporary period of time or if you're going to be permanently there. So make sure you do that. You're in an area for at least 3 months before you apply. Number four, you have to demonstrate what is known as physical presence within the United States for the required period of time. So if you're doing it on the 5-year basis, you want to make sure that you've been in the United States for those 5 years. And we'll talk about the documentation to establish that you've been within the United States for that time as well, because the burden is going to be upon you if something comes up where USCIS says it's unclear to us that you've been in the United States for that period of time. Which goes into the point of showing the next part, which is number 5, you've shown continuous residence for the required period of time as well. So, it's okay to be traveling to another country or your home country or where you were for a couple of months of the year. You can even do it for up to 6 months, but my advice is for everybody who is traveling abroad, try to make sure you're not on the edge of that 6 months, because if you go over by a day, you've kind of missed out that 1 year, and that may break that continuous period of time. So for example, let's say it's 2020 now and you got your green card in 2015, and then in 2018 you were outside of the country for 6 months and a couple of days right over, and that makes you ineligible, so you don't have that 5-year of continuously being in the United States. You're going to have to restart your clock all over again from the next year. So, that's something you don't want to end up missing out on, being able to file at a right time just because, a couple of days in the middle of those 5 years you were over. And USCIS, I know for a fact, is paying great attention to those details because they will look at your passport history and look at the days you're outside and you're traveling. So it's really important to do that. Now, number 6 is related to good moral character. This is a very fluid concept, and what I mean by that is, good moral character, immigration has defined it by different languages. So, it's not enough that you pay your taxes and that you work hard and you pay your financial obligations and other things like that as well. But you also, USCIS is looking at certain types of crimes that you may have committed where, in New York City or other places, those crimes may be small in terms of the eyes of the law, but USCIS may say, you know what, that's not that's not something we want this person to become a citizen. I'll give you an example. Maybe shoplifting. That's a crime. It's a small petty theft, where you were in a store and you picked up something and, they arrested you for it, or something else happened. That could be looked at negatively in terms of your good moral character. Also, driving while intoxicated, other types of things that may show up on your record. Those are things that would affect your good moral character, as well as other things you may be doing online in terms of social media. Maybe you're, promoting certain things that are that questionable in terms of showing that you have good moral character. So all of those things you have to pay attention to. Think about it yourself if you're applying yourself as an applicant, and especially if you're working with a lawyer, to go over anything where you might have been arrested or might have been issued a summons or a fine or something else to that effect. So that's really important in terms of good moral character, making sure you meet that criteria. The next point, the 7th point, is demonstrating an attachment to the principles and ideals of the United States Constitution. So the U.S. Constitution has all of these principles that we want our citizens to adhere to. And there's going to be questions that when you're looking at the application, they ask you, have you ever supported any totalitarian movement or been a part of any organization or group? If you answer yes to any of those questions, it could affect your citizenship application, because the USCIS officer may say that that person does not demonstrate a attachment to the principles and ideals of the United States Constitution, such as democracy, equality, other principles that are within the Constitution, and also come up in some of the civics tests as well. Now, the 8th point is that, of course, everybody thinks about this when they're studying for the citizenship test. You have to have basic U.S. history knowledge. For example, they may ask you, who is Abraham Lincoln, or who is George Washington, or what is the capital of the United States, or who is your United States senator, or name one of the original 13 states of the United States. So that's important. It shows that you have a basic knowledge of the United States, and it's part of the civics test. So the other part of that test, which a lot of people study for, is that you have to be able to have the basic understanding of English in terms of reading, writing, and speaking. So the immigration officer will either test you in terms of dictating to you to write a sentence out, such as the capital of the United States is Washington, D.C., or that we celebrate Independence Day on the 4th of July, and also discuss with you, conversationally, some basic things and gauge your ability to speak English as well. So you want to make sure that you do practice a little bit of the English in terms of speaking, writing, and being able to kind of carry a basic conversation if that comes up. And then, of course, the 9th point is that you have to take the oath of allegiance to the United States. That's where you will be sworn in. Oftentimes in New York City, there's a big gathering in downtown Brooklyn before a federal judge who comes in and administers the oath, and you stand up, you raise your hand, and everybody gets sworn in, and then they congratulate you, and you've now become a United States citizen. That's when you get your certificate of citizenship to demonstrate that you are a citizen. And that's essentially the general requirements. Now, let's look at some of the documentary requirements as well, because you can't just say I meet all that criteria, you have to demonstrate it, and you have to show it. So of course the first and most important thing is that you want to submit as part of your application your permanent resident. And sometimes people don't realize that you have to make a copy of the front and the back and send it as part of your application. And then you should also attach and bring with you, a local ID to show that you are living at this area and this address, that you're filing your application. And then the other thing you want to bring with you and attach, sometimes if you've been traveling, is your passport. You want to clearly show to US CIS immigration that you have met that continuous residency requirement. You haven't traveled outside of the United States for more than 6 months during any year and broken that continuity within the United States. This is really critical because, sometimes people may travel in the beginning of the year for 4 months, and then at the end of the year, they may travel for 2 months or so forth, and they may go over that 6-month period. I know during this time, while I'm making this video, we're living in the age where a lot of people are unable to travel due to COVID restrictions. So, what they need to do is that they need to make sure that they properly document their attempts to come back into the United States and demonstrate that they never wanted to break their continuous residence and their residency requirements in the United States, because that is something important in order not only just to keep a green card, but eventually to apply for citizenship as well. So, keep good documentation, keep good records, make sure you pay attention, and that you don't go over that 180-day period outside of the United States. So my advice is always stay below that. The other thing you want to do is, if you're married, you have to submit documentation of your legal status, your marital legal status. So, attach a copy of your marriage certificate, your marriage license, wherever you have that in terms of the state that it was issued from. If you don't have it, you have to find it and make sure you submit that. They are also requiring that if you were previously married, that you also submit, proof of termination of your previous marriage, including for your spouse as well. So they're going to want to see that, what was your spouse's marital situation before, he or she was married to you as well. The other thing really important is that if there was a name change ever made, if you had a previous name that you use, that you submit documentation and proof of that. I know I've had some clients where, they came to America and they changed their name, or, back home in their country, they changed their name to another name. Sometimes it could be, women who were using another name from another marriage, and they changed their name as well. So you want to make sure you have documentation regarding name changes. The other thing that you want to have is, your children's, if you have children, your children's birth certificates, those are required as well to just demonstrate to them that these are your children and they're your dependents. You have to submit those documentation related to your children. Now I'm going to kind of get those criteria that I was just talking about right now. Those are all related to the 5-year requirements, and when you're applying for that, you have to submit all of those documentation when you're applying on the 5-year basis. Now, there's some documents and pieces of evidence that are applicable if you are applying and trying to meet that 3-year early requirement. This is important because a lot of people don't realize it, that when they marry a U.S. citizen, they have an earlier eligibility to become a U.S. citizen as well, and that's that 3-year period. And you're able to do that if you meet these other criteria, and those are specific to this category. All the other requirements that I mentioned in terms of continuous residence within the United States, as well as making sure that you have good character, all those still require, but these special requirements apply to those people who are applying on an earlier 3-year basis, and they are that, number one, your spouse, the U.S. citizen spouse, has been a citizen for at least 3 years prior to you making that application. So that's important. So what you want to do is get documentation of your spouse whether it's their birth certificate showing they were born in the United States, or it's a US passport showing that they've been a US citizen from this period, or it's a certificate of naturalization showing that they got this certificate issued on this day, more than 3 years from the day that you're applying. The other thing is that if you were married before marriage to your current U.S. citizen spouse, you have to get documents related to your previous divorces. So, and demonstrate that they were all previously terminated, and get documentation to that effect as well. And now this is the part where you have to pay attention to when you're applying on this earlier part. Earlier process to become a citizen for 3-year criteria. You have to demonstrate, again, the burden's upon you, that you and your spouse have lived in a marital union for at least 3 years prior to your filing of the citizenship application. Now, marital union is this term that comes with evidence that you have to submit. And that evidence is detailed. They tell you the type of documents that you must submit. You can always submit additional types of documents if you're lacking on some of these documents. But generally speaking, when I work with my clients, we always want to make sure that we are submitting at least these types of documents, and they are joint bank statements and credit card statements demonstrating that you and your spouse have a financial commingling of assets, meaning you're spending money on things together and that you're making money and putting it into an account that you and your wife or your husband have access to as well. The second thing is leases or mortgages. So if you're living together, you should have a lease that has both of your names on it for that period of time, going back to when you started your marital union. And sometimes people are in houses where they can't get a lease agreement for different reasons, or the landlord says, I don't want to put, the husband or the wife on the lease. So, you should talk to your landlord and say, okay, I understand you only want to give the lease to me in my name. Can you list the other person at least as an occupant? So that would help you to at least demonstrate that, okay, we don't have a lease together with my name, but I was identified as an occupant living in this house. Or sometimes, young couples, they get married and they're living with their parents, and the parents are the ones that have a mortgage, and the parents like, what should I do? I don't know if I can give this person a lease or not. Make some sort of agreement between the landlord or homeowner that demonstrates that you are living at that property, and that should be enough to at least demonstrate that you and your wife or your husband are living together in part of the marital union. If you can afford, to own a home, if you have a mortgage, sometimes you want to think about possibly, adding your spouse on that mortgage as well, if you can. The other things, of course, are if you have children, submit copies of your birth certificates for your children. Look, here is our children that are born. Both of our names are on the birth certificate as the mother and father. That if you don't have children, that's okay. You can always submit other types of evidence as well. For example, the other type of evidence, the fourth point, is that if you have insurance policies together, maybe you and your spouse have a car insurance policy with both your names on it, a health insurance policy with both your names on it. Sometimes people may get term life insurance for themselves as well. Naming themselves as the policy holder and their spouse as the beneficiary of that. So those are things that you want to try to gather. And the other thing that's really important, and this is the fifth point, is that you want to make sure that when you're filing your taxes, you are filing your taxes together as married. So really, sometimes people can file their taxes married filing separately, married filing jointly, but it is an important piece of evidence, and USCIS officers do examine your tax documents or your tax transcripts to make sure that you were filing in the status that you're saying you were legally in. I know from my clients that has been a little bit of an issue, because sometimes people get married and they move in together, and in some instances, one spouse may not have a social security number because the Social Security Administration has to mail that person a card. So they're like, okay, it's the tax filing time period, but we haven't gotten our social security card. What should we do? I always tell them that, okay, just file your taxes now. When you get the social security card number, make sure you amend your taxes to say that you were married and that you had shown that you and your spouse were filing your taxes together. Okay, so now those are some of the general requirements in terms of documents and evidence. You can always submit more proof of evidence that you've been staying in the United States to meet any of those criteria if there's an issue in terms of, breaking the continuous requirement, and especially if you're looking at that other category related to marriage and applying earlier on a 3-year basis, you can always attach other types of evidence and documents. So, for example, you can show proof that you and your spouse have been traveling abroad together, whether it was part of a honeymoon or other vacations that you spent time together to demonstrate a continuous marital union. You can attach other types of documents, whether it's something related to, believe it or not, birthday cards or other things that you may be doing on certain occasions to memorialize your marital union, and anything else that you could think of. It's something that you can submit and demonstrate. So, for example, if you have a pet, maybe both of you are the owners of the pet, and you're registered as the owners of the pet together. That's enough type of evidence. Generally speaking, any type of property that you may own together, whether it's real property or some other type of property, if you can put both of your names on it together, that would be enough. So those are some of the key things and the key requirements related to the eligibility basis and the documentary basis. Please make sure you do apply before October 2nd, 2020 of this year. That's when the fee increases will be going up by a significant amount, some instances by double. And in one particular instance, they will be reducing the reduced fee, which used to be $320 there. Immigration is totally getting rid of that. So again, look over the requirements, look over the eligibility points that you need to make sure you meet, and do apply before the time runs out and the fee goes up higher, because you do want to try to get this application postmarked on October 2nd, 2020. Thank you for watching.